Myoho Renge Kyo. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Hi, friends. Thank you for your practice. Thank you for being here. I hope this finds you secure and in good health. The next term we've run into in our translations of the Lotus Sutra is the word Dhuta, or Dhutatanga. We are going through the Buddhism Reference. There's already a bunch of videos on each term. Some of you have mentioned that reading, whether it's an ebook or a print book, is a challenge, so I am endeavoring to do each term as a audio podcast. That way you also can have access to this information. In Mahayana Buddhism, and that is a distinction because many of these terms are old. You've heard me talk about this before. And they predate Buddhism in many instances. And in Buddhism alone, their meanings are developed and sometimes completely altered from their root in ancient Hindu languages. In Mahayana Buddhism, the source for this particular, I have several sources in here actually, but for this one, the academia.edu, a study and translation of the Gagangan Japari Prcha, don't know how quite to pronounce that one, sorry. Dhuta refers to performing ascetic practices. According to the Gaga, so on and so forth, the 8th chapter of the Mahasamnipata, a collection of Mahayana Buddhist sutras, accordingly, then, quote, then the Lord went on to speak these verses, so on and so forth, they who are released from the bondage or the bandhana of actions, karma, remain in morality. Thus, the morality causes the liberation of vimoksha and becomes the basis of awakening, bodhi. They who perform the ascetic practices, Dhuta, in a solitary place, aranya, know how to be satisfied, samtusta, with few desires and purify their thoughts by meditating, dhyana, separated from assembly with severe austerity, semleka, so on and so forth, end quote. So, you can read that many different ways, and Shakyamuni certainly does. Many commentaries certainly do. From the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, Dhutanga, alternative Dhutanga, is in Pali, literally, limbs of scrupulousness, vis-a-vis austerities or ascetic practices. The term is alternatively known as simply Dhuta in both Pali and Sanskrit. The Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit term Dhuta Tunguna means the qualities, guna, of the purified Dhuta person, vis-a-vis an ascetic. Dhutanga refers to a specific set of 13 ascetic practices that the Buddha authorized monks to adopt voluntarily for the purpose of cultivating contentedness with little detachment, detachment, energy, and moderation. These the mouth just doesn't want to work this morning. These austerities are not enjoined on monks and nuns by the Vinaya, but are rather optional practices that monastics were sanctioned to adopt for limited periods of time in order to foster sensory restraint, also known as indriyasamvara, an important constituent of morality, or sila. Based on the Buddha's own failed experiments with extreme mortification of the flesh as a practice conducive to enlightenment while he was a bodhisattva, this specific set of practices was considered to provide a middle way, a madhyama pratipad, between self-mortification and sensual indulgence. And you know, Nagarjuna spoke a great deal about the middle way, right? The madhyamika. The 13 authorized practices are, let's see if these don't sound familiar to you: wearing patched robes made from discarded cloth rather than from cloth donated by lay people, wearing only 3 robes, going for alms, asking for donations, gifts, so on, not omitting any house while on the alms round, right? No prejudices, no predilections, rather than begging only at those houses known to provide good food. Eating only what can be eaten in one sitting, eating only food received in the alms bowl rather than more elaborate meals presented to the sangha, refusing more food after indicating one has eaten enough, dwelling in the forest, dwelling at the root of a tree, dwelling in the open air, using only a tent made from one's robes as shelter, dwelling in a channel or carnal ground, samsana, satisfaction with whatever dwelling one has, and sleeping in a sitting position without ever lying down. Interesting. The comparable Mahayana list of the 12 Dhuta gunas is essentially the same, dropping the 2 practices involving eating, 5 and 6, and adding an additional rule on wearing only garments made of coarse hemp and wool. The Visuddhimagga recommends these ascetic practices especially to those of either greedy or deluded temperaments. So it's a real discipline, right, for those who obviously display a reluctance to do so. Because greed and delusion both wane through, respectively, the continued practice of asceticism and the clarification of what is important in life. Sometimes a person of hateful temperament is also said to benefit because conflict abates as one becomes content with little. The Buddha offered this authorized list of voluntary practices after explicitly rejecting a more severe set of austerities proposed by his cousin and rival, Devadatta. There's our friend again. That would have been mandatory for all members of the Sangha. Forest dwelling, see Anyaravasi, subsistence on gathered alms food only, use of rag robes only, dwelling at the foot of a tree, and strict vegetarianism. With the growth of settled monasticism, the practice of the austerities waned, although asceticism continues to be a major prestige factor within the Buddhist lay and monastic communities. In their accounts of India, both Faxian and Xuanzang note the presence of followers of Devadatta who adhered to the austere practices he had recommended to the Buddha. The Dhutangas should be distinguished from tapas, severe austerities, or duskararyas, difficult feats of religious virtuosity, practices that do not necessarily involve the authorized types of ascetic practices. So, obviously, that's from early teachings. Shakyamuni was dealing with people who were intensely of the flesh. You can imagine that some 3,000 years ago, in the Buddha's day, in Shakyamuni's day, without cell phones and internet and televisions and on and on and on, distractions were always of the carnal desires, right? It was either sex or food that drove you, or maybe a financial gain of some sort, depending on your caste, right? So, conversely, if you're going to make people realize how controlled they are by those aggregates, those skandhas, those desperate needs to satisfy the sensual pleasures, you had to teach them how to separate themselves from them so that they could recognize how powerful they really were. So these are ascetic practices. Shakyamuni didn't want to resort to this kind of thing. When he first gained enlightenment and taught, his first sermon was the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Kigan Sutra, right? He was just talking about the glorious experience of enlightenment. But then he had to back off of that, 2-3 weeks of that, and he saw nobody was understanding what he was talking about. He had to go back to what he had gone through for 7 or 12 years, depending on who you read, and all of the Brahmins that he followed seeking this answer, this indelible truth of reality. He went through he went through starving himself to the point of almost dying, right? Among other ascetic practices that he did, all of the famous ones that you hear about constantly in martial arts movies or other movies, not speaking for a year, on and on and on. And he realized when he started teaching that no one was understanding because he was taking for granted the path he went through in order to get to this enlightenment of Buddhahood. So he started incorporating aspects of his own journey into his teaching, into his monastic community to help people achieve, without, throwing their lives away, but asceticism, like it says in the book, this was an optional practice, but probably greatly favored because you would grow in your understanding, your capacity to understand by leaps and bounds. So that's Dhuta. That's the origins of Dhuta. And the way it's used in Mahayana, and I don't think that goes deeply enough into it, may require a revision, but as it applies to our discipline of Nichiren's doctrine of the Lotus Sutra, Dhuta really, it's kind of irrelevant. Let's just say it's irrelevant. But in the spirit of Dhuta, we certainly deal with earthly desires are enlightenment, right? Nichiren. That's where that comes from, is taking those ingrained samsaric habits and using the energy of those desires, those cravings, and those clingings, and sitting it in front of our mandala and our stupa, our butsudan, our altar, and using that same energy to chant single-mindedly to awaken Buddhahood. That kind of commitment, that kind of energy. No, don't chant for your desires. That's samsara. What are you doing? That's a gross misinterpretation. No, use that drive that you feel for, I want, to want single-mindedly Buddha. Namo myo renge kyo. Now you're turning in earthly desires into enlightenment. Yes? Follow? All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you mostly for your practice, yes? The more of us practice sincerely with that kind of drive and resolve, the more the world will come back from the brink of self-destruction, which we see everywhere today. It's crazy. It's a little frightening. But take that fright and put it in GoHonzon, right? Open that mind of Buddhahood. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Take care of your health, please. Keep your practice strong, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much for your support. Links in the description. You know what to do. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Until next time, bye for now.